Subscribe to Need to Know for the CEO podcast, and you will get to listen to and be inspired by other CEOs as they share their experiences and best practices. You'll also get to listen to subject matter experts who will brief you on what they think you need to know to do your job more effectively. The experts will occasionally include Ian and I, who will do episodes on topics like creating a winning strategy, OKR best practices, maturing metric capabilities, and building a high-performance culture, and other business news-related topics. Enjoy the show.
Ian, we're here again today to talk about something that you and I inherently talk about probably once a day. I'm calling it the paradox of measure what matters. Probably the leading OKR book that we see people get introduced to. I think it's fair to say we don't believe it's the best OKR book out there, but it's certainly the one that people mention when they first get introduced to us. If I had to guess, I would say 80% of the people who jump on a call to ask for help from us say that is their introduction. What's the paradox? People that we then get to know better invariably don't measure what matters.
Yeah, absolutely. I think no book has done more to sell the concept of OKRs, but no book has done less to actually make OKRs work. And I think that paradox is one of the reasons, frankly. So should we dig into that?
No, that'd be great. I think it's such an important topic in the context of so many things. It's, we're talking about OKRs, and of course the book does. But actually, we're not as well. And one of the things that we're obviously very keen on is zooming out and realizing that OKRs are just in the middle of a tapestry that has a much bigger picture to see, and that ranges from having other elements in it like strategy, metrics, executional detail, even little details around how we run workshops and how we get together, and culture, values, guiding principles, and many other parts that actually make an organization function. And in many ways, the mistake is thinking that it's just about OKRs. But when we're talking about measuring what matters, I think what will come out is we'll get to see that we're talking about a lot of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So how about we start with the title of the book itself? As you say, measure what matters. And our perspective, I think, generally is that people don't invest in measuring what matters. And there are a few characteristics there. What is that? It's measuring what matters. Why don't they do that? It's because it's a dynamic challenge. It's not this one and done kind of thing. We talk about that a lot with our customers, don't we? This journey. Yeah. But maybe and really something I see, which I think is really interesting, is they don't have the time or the skill to do it, but also I don't think organizations understand the value of measuring what matters. They don't understand what that's going to provide for them. And I think for some teams, it's getting harder. Yeah. I think one of your really deep domains is marketing attribution and revenue attribution. That's an incredibly difficult topic. It's incredibly detailed. It's fast moving. I know we're changing legislation; it's changing as a challenge. So there are a few facets as to why teams aren't doing it.
I think it is a complicated area, and I think your observation around do people have the time and the skill, or do they see the value in investing in meaningful measurement is correct. There's also, as you said, complications that make it harder for some teams than others. And I think there is to add an extra layer of complexity, there's sometimes a cultural element. And for example, if you are an organization or a team that fears accountability, then your reluctance to measure what matters goes up a lot. And then there's actually the definition of what does measuring what matters actually mean to me, to you, to another person, that is also variable. And then you add on to that the sort of other dimensions that you mentioned, time, it's a dynamic thing. What matters this month might not matter so much next month. And having the systems, processes, or willingness to actually create a dynamic model, a metrics model that is changing through time and actually part of the fabric of the business is something that most people haven't either decided that they want or don't even know that they need. And I think there's a number of sort of different elements in that.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on. And I think this idea of the timeliness and the fact that things are dynamic is interesting, because I think people are getting to the point where they understand that you can't just create a 9-month project and never change path and never listen to the signals. What we're teaching organizations, I believe, is that actually you need to have goals that learn and goals that iterate, and they're connected to a data model that changes as the world changes, but also as you learn more, and ultimately to a strategy that evolves and adapts as you learn, as you disprove or prove hypotheses. And these things, are interconnected. I think, we're pushing that adaptiveness further and further up the value chain, I think, to the very top.
I think that's how most organizations are, though. I think the old legacy method of long-term strategies reviewed annually at a set cadence, long-term goal setting, KPIs that are reviewed infrequently, or not by how often the data is updated, but how often we decide what KPIs we even need within the business. That is, I don't even want to call it dead. It is dead. I don't know many industries where that actually is the bedrock of future success. We now live in a world that's moving so quickly, where customer needs are moving quickly, technology moving quickly, the landscape's using differently, how employees want to work, amongst many other dynamics. If we're not adaptive, I don't know how we can have any degree of confidence in how we're going to be here in 2, 3, 4, 5 years anyway. I mean, the world is never moved so fast. And if you're an organization listening to this and you are running those fixed slow cadences, if you're not running to a more adaptive, more fluid way of working, and by adaptive we mean that you're able at the extreme to pivot, but at the more frequent outcome of that is you're fine tuning all the time.
Yeah, completely. And it is a different mindset. I often talk about my first job, one of my first jobs in the big corporate world at GlaxoSmithKline. I managed to get myself a role in strategy. And as a team, we used to write these things which were really focused, well, not focused would be not the right word, but looked at the 18-month horizon at least. And some often, and this is part of the way the drug business works, it can be 5 to 10 years. And then we'd maybe show a few people those strategies, but they then disappeared. They would go on and write the next thing. We never updated them. We never learned as we went. And I called myself a strategist then. Honestly, I didn't deserve the label. Think about what we try to teach organizations now. It's a world of difference to that.
So if we're sort of getting back to sort of the John Doerr book of Measure What Matters and the idea of measurement, if you were to characterize the kind of OKRs we get to see when organizations have had a go themselves, and obviously we get to see both strategic documentation, we get to chat to teams, we get to see historic OKRs, what's functioned well and what is not functioned well. What do you see as kind of the typical sort of key result type that is predominant in these organizations?
Yeah. So, and I'd add, what OKRs did I create when I was first using the framework? Because these are not mistakes that I'd never avoided. I did exactly the same things. And the first thing you see is kind of project, we're delivering a project, and those projects can be usually minimum 6 months, often longer. We see OKRs that are very task-based. We're going to produce this or create a marketing plan or build this feature or release a piece of software. And those are very common. And the first OKRs were exactly that. And then, maybe slightly better, we've got stuff you can actually measure and you could really define outcomes around, which are maybe slow moving KPIs, really lagging stuff. So there's no real connection of the work you're doing on a day-to-day basis, but you've got this kind of hunch that if we do this, we will see this change in a metric. And it can be at the highest level, it's revenue, but can be a bit more leading than that. They tend to be really slow moving, or maybe they're fast moving KPIs, but we don't understand how they connect to a bigger picture. Mm-hmm. And of course, there's the final categorization, which is really good OKR. So, we do see that. We do see that in teams. And obviously, we'd probably add that we see them most when we finish our engagements, the correct OKRs are there. How about you? Anything you'd add to that?
No, I think that's the right list. And then what I was kind of internally smiling to myself, probably externally too. And I was actually thinking, what would you actually call the book with what on the, if you were actually to reflect what actually goes on first time around for most people, it'd probably be called something like Measure What We Can.
Yeah. Yeah. There's an incredibly important thing there. I think we might touch on that later, which is, OKRs tend not to measure what you already measure. You're going to have to measure something new quite often, even if you've got a lot of metrics. That's often true. Yeah. So what about that connection? Going back into metrics maturity in a data model. Why aren't people? We don't see that as core. As we see it as core, but we don't see it in core from organizations. We don't see often. Actually, to be honest, I don't see people talking about it on social media. Why is that?
I think there's a number of parts in play here. None of the books say it matters as much as it does. The tools, the templates, the help sheets, the example sheets that you get to see, that everywhere you get some form of education from, or clues as to how you actually do go about this, they're very thin on this stuff. Whether because they're not experienced enough to know how important it is themselves, or whether it is seen as complicating something unnecessarily, and therefore let's make it simple or dumb it down. Mm-hmm. I can only hypothesize as to why people have a lack of appetite to actually address measurement in the context of measuring what matters properly and comprehensively. To that, to what is that? What are the implications of that for in the real world? When we talk to organizations about OKRs and we ask them what we think are relatively straightforward, simple questions about where they are in their own metric maturity journey, it's often some teams are further ahead than others. Some teams are nowhere. Some teams can, some can't. It's not a living, breathing thing. It's kind of a best effort sometimes. And when they see it as part of the project, not as a kind of key part or a fundamental part of the project, they seem surprised when we bring it up. Mm-hmm. And almost to the point where we're going, this could be putting them off. But we have to. What's interesting about us is we have to be true to ourselves, and we have to go. If you want to work with us, you're going to talk about metrics. We're going to talk about measurement. We're going to talk about a journey where you are more capable of measuring things than you perhaps are now, and that's true of most organizations. If we get those foundations in the same way, strategy is a foundation. In the same way, having tools like experimentation and fast learning loops are a core skill and competency. If you get these core skills, competencies, capabilities in, you're going to be really, really good at OKRs. If you don't, you're not going to be so good. And you got a choice. You do have a choice. And we talk about journeys all the time. You can end your journey at mediocre, or you can end your OKR journey at excellent. Our commitment is to excellence.
Yeah, and that's again, I'd like think about the predominant conversation in OKR, and it's still metrics are talked about more, but not nearly enough. They're right at the heart. And I think of this picture. We talk about a lot about being OKR being a strategy execution framework, but there's still a gap. You've got strategy and you've got OKRs. There's something in the middle that joins them together. And for me, that's a metrics model. It answers many questions. It provides a picture. And I think the fact that we do fight to have that as part of the engagement, and sometimes, don't get me wrong, there are organizations that are really good on metrics, have great maturity, and they're just not making that connection between strategy and OKRs, and we help there. But more often, organizations need a bit of help to see the value of this work and also understand how to actually, make it happen. And I think the fact that we really dwell on that and stand by our principles, okay, it's going to cost us work sometimes, but I think it's at the heart of what we do. I think I'm proud of that.
I think with the journey to excellence also comes all of the upside of that, which is, not just revenue growth, it's cultural growth, people growth, and many other aspects. But I'm aware that we've thrown a number of sort of terms around, a bit of jargon, things like metrics model has come up a few times. I'm guessing for a number of people listening, they probably don't know what we mean. If you were to sort of describe what a metrics model is and perhaps how it looks visually, actually how people could imagine it in their heads, how would you describe a metrics model?
Yeah, the simplest visualization of a metrics model is a tree. So I think if people have probably heard the term KPI trees, and a KPI tree helps you understand the kind of, and I don't like using this term in the OKR context, but the cascade of how metrics connect to each other. I think about what organizations do with OKRs. They often measure something, but that don't reflect enough on what matters. So that's where the book's kind of falling short. And I think when you think of that KPI tree, you think of the most classic simple model there is, I think, in business is a sales funnel. So we get leads in, we convert leads, and we have repeat custom. And it's very easy for anyone to understand those relationships. And actually, those kind of relationships occur across the business. There are things we can look at and measure which have connection to other events in our business that we desire. And when we build a model, we articulate those relationships. And what it does even better, I think, is when we articulate our strategy, we're describing it verbally. We're using hypotheses. We're talking about concepts. If we then connect that really to the underlying metrics, we can show that we believe that. If I think there's a good example that we've had at one of our customers, which is if we reply to quotes quicker, if we can bring that time down, we're going to see a better closure rate in our sales business. Now that's quite a simple example, but I think if we look at the picture of metrics as a whole, there are those kind of relationships all over. And when you build a metrics model, you build a picture of your whole business. Now, the challenge, of course, is, and where we help is, those models would be enormous. If you documented every single relationship of data in your business, no one would ever be able to see, would be able to consume that. The skill is to focus down on really discrete but connected models. So one product team, customer success team, they may have different aspects of the models they're working on, but connected. And the key to a good model is picking the right context at the right time. So hopefully that helps people understand, metric models are all about the relationship between metrics. They're not just about metrics on their own. I kind of sometimes describe it as, a metric is a tree and a metric model is a forest or a wood. And if you want to see the wood, you need to understand those relationships.
I think what I'd add to that is, if you visualize that kind of tree-based diagram is that all the lines that connect them have different degrees of influence, and your influence and your confidence of that influence is variable between them. So there are relationships that you hypothesize that are important, but you've not yet proven and don't know. Not every relationship between two different metrics has the same level of influence, and you can use red, amber, green, and other techniques to actually denote some of those. And I'd say that everything in the tree is also not necessarily a metric. It can be a hypothesis, it can be an experiment, it can be a thing that you think that you're going to do to act on that metric as a way of trying to influence it. And it can be, and for that reason, it can also be something that's very easy to sort of put in front of teams to allow them to actually contribute ideas, experiments, things we could try, things we've tried before but could do better, etc.
And that relates back into that thing we were talking about at the top, which is a metrics model is a point in time. You know, it's your view of an understanding of the world as it is now. And you know, there's this old adage which is very, very true. All models are wrong, but some are useful. And you're trying to solve some problems with your model, and you've got to accept it will change as you learn, and it'll also change as the world changes. Yeah. And those relationships will not always stay the same. Yeah, good addition.
So if listeners could imagine this tree, as you get further down the tree, we've got more leading metrics. And one of the core use cases, obviously, we're leaning on here is some of those leading metrics might become key results. There might be things that we want to act upon as part of an OKR. They could be because at the root cause they're problematic, or there could also be, we predict that if we improve this number, that something that's more laggy might improve as well. So we're getting into sort of predictive and root cause analytics with that as the core use case for making really, really good key results. I think we talked about the value of investing in a metrics model earlier. What I'd also stress is a mature metrics model capability that's woven into kind of the cadence of strategy as well as goal setting as well as execution has other use cases. So things like, why does this company and team exist? It's one of the fastest onboarding techniques I've ever seen, which is to show a team the kind of metrics model that matters to them and why as a team we're here and how we're trying to influence performance. So I think it's a really sort of powerful tool for many reasons, not just the fact that it plays into OKR maturity so well.
Yeah, I think that's the depth or probably the breadth of influence of having a picture of your data is significant. You know, it's easy to talk about strategy, data, goals, and actions as a kind of value chain, but it also makes it really easy to understand how, as a business, you're creating value and also how you capture it. And it brings this visual, you know, as I mentioned earlier, strategy can be quite dry. It brings a visual representation to it. And we talk a lot today about leaders being storytellers. And I think it really helps you tell the story of the business and how you believe you're going to succeed. You know, we talk, one of our key principles behind our use of OKRs is this idea of the narrative, where we really go deep in explaining why we've chosen that OKR, why we believe focusing on this will have an impact for the business. And when that's connected to a data model, it's just a lot more tangible. I think people understand it a lot better. And frankly, you're encouraging much better thinking about that hypothesis when you can see it in that context.
For sure. The why and that whole intentional thread that runs through strategy to metrics to OKRs to execution, an incredibly important part of the whole sort of OKR cycle. And as you pointed out, it's the conversations around that are where the real sort of alchemy lives. And even having to write those things down, you know, what are your sort of logical building blocks behind why you chose that? The actual articulation of those, both in the verbal and written form, are kind of where the real magic happens, and incredibly important.
Yeah.
Question that I've kind of got in my head is really to do with value and perception, which is, I think a lot of people listening could perceive that this is incredibly hard to do, takes a long time, and will, if we were to invest in achieving a level of metric maturity as well as OKR maturity, that's going to take a very, very long time, and it might be a distraction, and we've got other things that we should be doing in the meantime. In my experience, you can get an awfully long way inside one quarter, and then you're laying the foundations for future quarters on the back of that. And it's a skill that will live inside your organization and help it to thrive in the long term. What's your experience?
100% agree. And I think as probably even more than most of the concepts we work with, data models are something where you can get value really quite quickly and then progressively build upon it. I think actually even easier than OKRs themselves. You can look at quite a narrow part of your picture and think about the relationships in data there, and that you can get value, I think, in weeks, maybe even shorter than that. So yeah, I think more than anything else, I think it's something that builds value progressively. And it's, coming back to this, the model has to be useful. You can make a useful model quite quickly. It's not solving the problem for the whole company, but what I love is when you can teach one team how to do that, and other teams can look at it and say, yeah, wow, I can see the value there. And there are some teams, Matt, honestly, where they could knock something up in an hour. They really could. They could start, it will be wrong. There'll be problems with it, but they're already in their mind, these relationships, but they've never talked about them properly. They've never written them down. They've never kicked the tires on them. And you can make incredible progress on that in some cases, very, very quickly. I always say that data is more used in product than anywhere else. And lots of product teams have lots of data. But even within product management, this kind of visualization of data this way is underused. And, it's gaining prevalence, but there's a lot of opportunity out there. And it's not quarters. It's weeks, days, even hours in some cases to create something valuable.
I think it's the same with all forms of conversation, strategy, metrics, OKRs, the activities, experiments, projects we're going to do to achieve them. From this moment that you start talking about them, there's value. What we find is most teams don't have the forum or the framework in which these important conversations are actually happening. So the value of everything that we do happens from the very first moment that we get beyond teaching the basics until we start talking about the business, the team, the individuals, what's going on, where do we need to be, what are the opportunities, what are the issues we're facing, what are the strategic choices we're making amongst many, many, many conversations that are happening or need to happen. And you're really just providing a framework in which we can sort of channel those conversations and come out with both the right choices and then the right decisions. You often talk about a lot of what we do is being sort of very much geared towards making the right decisions at the right time. And, whether we call that decision optimization or something else, but ultimately that's what all of this is trying to do. We're always presented with choices and we want to optimize what the choices are. And we always then want to make the right decision in that moment in the context of what would make it right. Yeah.
It's, and, I think this concept of people don't see the value in it, I think is, as we talk, it's open. This is the key problem. And it's the key problem of, I guess, everything we sell and everything we try to advise on. It's helping people understand why this is useful to them. But if someone's kind of trying to do this themselves, this is the most, I use this phrase so often. I'm sure people are bored of hearing it, but it's this idea of, you think big, you start small, and you learn fast. And there's something behind all three of those phases. So you think about, okay, ultimately this can impact the whole business. but we're not going to get there straight away. So we start small. Let's start with one team. Let's start with one problem we're looking at the moment. But we learn fast, which means we keep iterating on it. And you need all three of those kind of lenses, I think, to make this work. And I guess the thing we see most often is the learn fast that's missing. People will build a model and then it's stuck. That's your model. They don't evolve it. So yeah, I think that's a great phrase to kind of think of if you're starting your own journey on data modeling.
So if people have got their objectives and they've formulated the right objectives for the right reasons and they're getting into writing key results, it's safe to say that we would always advise that the best key results are the fast moving metrics that are targeting the things that matter in relation to that objective at any one moment in time. And they are often, if you have a metrics model, rooted inside that model itself. What the model often also does, and through having it as part of the narrative and the conversation, is unearth things that you don't measure yet that you might want to baseline. So kind of another good type of key result is, the intent to measure something, but maybe we will struggle putting a meaningful target there. Without the model, those two really good types of key result are missing.
Yeah, and you're acting blind. I think about one organization I worked with and talking about this different separation between data points and data relationships. And the CEO, we had a problem, part of a product, and the CEO used to look at every fortnight 48 KPIs. It's a very data rich situation, lots of information going in there. But of course, when you're looking at that many numbers, it's hard stroke impossible to know where to focus. And what was missing, what I guess the journey we hadn't made with the CEO was telling them the story behind the data, telling about why those metrics mattered back to the book. So we didn't paint the right picture for him, really. And that is such a, these weren't OKRs. This was just a product conversation. But time and time again, this crops up where we look at data in isolation and not in relationships. It's massive.
So I think people listening to this might not have the tooling as well. So, we've obviously built strategy, metrics models, metrics, KPI trees, OKRs, etc., into our own technology for a reason. But it doesn't have to, if you haven't got Zockery as a tool, then you can use, you mentioned Miro boards, you can use mind mapping tools. There are many ways of kind of planning out metrics trees that outside software. So that shouldn't put people off. So I think it is a very accessible management technique that anyone could go and start a conversation in their teams with. And I think that if you are serious about using OKRs well, my advice would be you add it as a core part of the weekly, monthly, quarterly check-in process. And actually it becomes more dynamic, and you do connect it to whatever you're using to manage OKR progress. And they're inherently part of the same big picture, in the same way strategy is, in the same way kind of our weekly priorities and kind of our guiding principles and all the other things that hold good management together.
Yeah. I mean, you're probably bored of this analogy now, but when I look at most of OKR tools out there, they connect you to a tree, but there is absolutely no view of the woods.
Yeah.
And really what we're trying to do is navigate around the woods. We're not looking to just improve one tree.
I think OKR tooling is part of the problem, though, isn't it? I mean, in many ways, what the accessibility of all the tools, and we see some users of our own software do this, which is that they're told or think they need to create these very deep, long cascades that go many, many, many levels down, and that's what OKRs is all about. And it's actually the opposite. It's about having a few wildly important goals that are satelliting around strategic themes. It's around less is more. And the overhead that comes with creating those very, very deep cascades that are not rooted in any particular thought or metrics, where the teams have that kind of panic, which is, where do I fit into this tree, and how do I add another child result from this just to show my worth?
Yeah.
It creates a lack of critical thinking, a lack of connectivity, a bit of paralysis, and there's no meaningful connection with anything. And for me, that's where OKRs get a really bad name as well. And I think technology vendors are partly responsible for that, because we've facilitated that in many ways. We've worked hard not to enable that in the purest sense, and we try and sort of restrain people to get some sensibility. Enabling or having additional capabilities like KPI trees is part of that. But it's certainly, some of the engagements we get asked to partake in are, whether they've started with a spreadsheet or a tool, normally start with many tens, sometimes hundreds of OKRs, because they think that's what's required. And what I would want to share in relation to metrics models and measuring what matters is, when you do, you're basically enabling the less is more.
Yeah, I think it's a fair comment, and I think, to be fair to tool vendors, they're learning alongside the rest of us. If I look at where OKR theory is now compared to 5 years ago, it's quite different. I mean, I feel like I've been banging on about metrics models for years now. It's starting to kind of get some traction. So hopefully tool vendors will get there in time. I also love, actually, you touched on something I hadn't thought of before there, which is the idea of how people use a cascade of, we know that cascading OKRs is a really bad idea. It's not a great model at all. But people can come to think of that as, oh yeah, we've got a kind of data model. We've cascaded OKRs, and you're just propagating. It's almost like your bad OKR process, and in kind of leaking into your data model and your strategy. Whereas what teams should be doing, they should have a local strategy. They should have their view of how they succeed in their goals for their team, and cascading OKRs just undermines that whole process.
Absolutely. And I think there's the conversations that you actually want to happen around both metrics, objectives, key results, activities, experiments, hypotheses. They can't happen in that context, because the job you've been told to do is add something at the 7th level down of this tree and tell me how you're going to help. And I think that's probably the worst thing that an organization can actually do. But that's just to do with where companies have both learned, and I guess the tooling to a certain extent. So I think we've covered kind of the paradox of measuring what matters. Hopefully, the takeout from that would be invest in your data model. And from the very first moment that you start talking about it, you're probably going to get value. Visualize it. Get familiar with concepts like influence and confidence and levers and other areas like that, and then try and sort of start thinking about how it actually integrates deeply within the OKR framework, and then how it also integrates into OKR cycles, strategic cycles, and know that it, like strategy, like goals, like execution, it's dynamic and adaptive. That's probably how I'd like to summarize what I'd like people to take out. Have you got anything you'd want to add to that?
No, I think that's a really great summary, and I think you'll know when you are really starting to see success when your data model becomes part of your daily discussion, when it becomes part of the lingua franca, when you tell the story of your strategy, the data model is kind of an integral part of it. That's when you know you're succeeding. And yeah, you can make progress and get to some of that really quite quickly.
I think if you're listening, go try it. Honestly, look up how to do it. The web's full of great advice on metric trees, KPI trees, or come and talk to us, book a meeting, and we'll take you through what they look like and how they work. as part of just getting introduced to us. But yeah, brilliant chat. Thanks, Ian.
Thanks, Matt.